Hey everybody, it's RP back with another Armory video, and today we're actually going to go into a bit of the usage and tactics behind the use of historical weapons because it's been requested. So I'm going to go through each type of weapon that I own and how it was used historically, and we'll see what's up. So the first ones we're going to go with are the Roman swords that I have, and so the gladii. Now I don't have a pilum, but historically speaking, Roman soldiers during the late Republic and early to Middle Empire would have used a gladius or a gladii, which just means sword in Latin, the language of the Romans. That is why they came from the region called Latium. So, how would one of these weapons be used? Well, first things first, you would have a column of Roman soldiers in a line, one of these. This is a scutum, the traditional Roman shield. Now, a scutum is the basis of our modern SWAT riot shields. And the scutum is a large shield held on the back with a boss, and then generally has designs in the front. This is the winged thunderbolt design of the early empire. So, in formation, a Roman would stand like this, and it would be this sword was, it could cut. You could throw cuts with it, mostly just downward cuts, but that wasn't the primary use of the gladius. It would normally be used as a thrust with the scutum up, and with the thrust. You go into the thrust, you'd go in, you'd try to get the guy sort of right in this area, because these wide-leafed blades, they weren't going up against much armor in these days. Would puncture and do a lot of damage. It was often a fatal attack. So that's how the gladius would have been used. Now, for the most part. But the gladius was actually not the first thing the Romans deployed in combat. So the Romans were quite an adaptive people, and that's why they lasted so long and did so well militarily. The scutum was adapted in roughly like the 300s BC, 200s and 300s BC, from the shields used by the Gauls, which were a Celtic people out of what is now France. Now, these shields are large and quite protective. You can see, it blocks pretty much my whole body, especially if I go like this. And if I'm in a line with a bunch of guys, and we got our shields pretty much right next to each other, not much is getting through. That's why modern riot guys do the same thing. So, now what did this formation do? Well, before they'd reach combat, they would actually be running with these at their side and would have two pilum. Now, pilum are a short javelin of sorts. And they would throw their pilum, one right after the other, at the enemy. And the cool thing about the pilum was the pilum essentially bent on contact once it hit the ground or whatever it hit, making unusable to throw back, which was an issue that a lot of armies that used javelin men during those days ran into. So, now, then they would get into combat and would create a wall of scuta with gladius stabbing. Each man would only stay on the front for about 8 minutes before the guy behind him took his spot. Now, he wasn't dead unless he died. He would then shift to the back of the line, and it would be about an hour and a half before he would have to fight again, before the rotation got back to him. So you can see the guys do fight for a fair bit of time, but they're constantly shifting and able to overcome fatigue due to it. So this is my gladius machete. It's machete blade, but it is a gladius shape. So this is about I think this is about a 27-inch sword with a longer handle than the Murmillo, but 27 inches in the, well, I don't know exactly, but this is actually about the length of the Roman gladius. This is made more to mimic the silhouette of mine's gladius, which it's wide. It's a little bit wider out here, tapers going up, and then flares out into this beautiful leaf. And this is sort of the shape that the Romans would go with. So a lot of just cuts downward, thrusts forward. Now, this is a good one for training to get a feel of it. And this is only about $30. And it's a powerful, powerful piece. And it comes wicked sharp. I mean, I put a real good edge on it, so. You can also buy a training gladius, which is made of plastic, essentially. But with the shield, a Roman would go. And they'd have armor. Depending on the period, most of the time it would either be a chainmail shirt that ended around here with shoulder padded extra chainmail, or and a tunic underneath, or if it was fully into the empire, they would use lorica segmentata, which was a banded plate armor, essentially, where bands of metal, steel plate covered their body. Quite useful in a fight. So, like I said, this is about the length of the average Roman gladius. This guy, my shorter one, the one by Devil's Edge, looks more historically accurate because it's not made to be a machete in the modern day. But this is the length a gladiator would have used. It's shorter. It's only 28 inches in total, where I think this one's about 32 to 34 inches total. And you can see the Romans would also have done something like this, cuts, thrusts, and they would also have been pushing the shield out. That was often used in the arena. We know gladiators fought like that, which is probably, and a lot of gladiators were ex-soldiers who came down on their luck monetarily. So that we know is likely historically accurate. And what they would do is they'd throw a punch out with the shield, try to knock the guy's weapon away, and get him right in the gut. And that's because there's a decent amount of vital organs right about here, and you could easily take somebody out, and it was often fatal. Pretty much anything up in here, this whole area they'd aim for. So, yeah. I'm not going to do any cut tests as it's cold and windy out today, but you will definitely see that in a future video. But, for the most part, the gladius is a very famous weapon because it was the weapon that the Romans used during the period when they were the most successful. Because they adopted it when they fought Celtic tribes in what is now Spain on the Iberian Peninsula. That and the Pugio, which was the secondary dagger that the men would have used. But the gladius, we know for a fact, is taken directly from them. We have reason to believe that the Pugio was as well. But the gladius, it's a powerful cutting sword if you use it right, but it's really primarily in that thrust, that nice buttery thrust. But yeah, my thoughts on the gladius is a really, really beautiful looking weapon. It just, something about this just really sort of straight and short, just really beautiful weapon. And I like it. Prior to the gladius, the Romans likely used more Greek and Etruscan style arms. So what we would think would be either the falcata, the copus, or the xiphos, which is, the xiphos isn't all that different. It's probably more leaf shaped in the blade, meaning it was a far better cutter than this guy. But the Romans saw the potential in the gladius when fighting these Iberian tribes, adapted it, and they ever only had another one main sword called the spatha. And a spatha is shaped sort of more like a longer sword. Almost, if you can envision Gladius, it's about double as long and about half as wide. And the spatha, for all of the Republic and Empire, would have, not all of the Republic, but at least all of the Empire and the late Republic, the spatha was used by horsemen because they could get down and they could do their slashes that they would need to do. And horsemen used a different shield that was a center gripped, like 24-inch shield, almost like a Viking shield but smaller. And they would go through and they would cut. But by the late Empire period, production of two different types of sword for the military just wasn't economical anymore. Late Empire is characterized by a lot of generals vying for control of the Roman state all over both sides of the Empire. After the Empire split, they even did this. And thus the army was kind of in this limbo where it never was really unified. And they were also facing quite often incursions by barbarian factions, and thus they just didn't have time to prepare good weapons and armor anymore, or at least weapons like this. And they gave up on the Lorca Segmentata because it cost too much to produce, and so they went back to using primarily chainmail, and they gave up on the old gladius and large scutum, large rounded scutum. They went back to an oval scutum, and they still used the pilum, but adapted it so it didn't break on contact anymore, and took the spatha, the longer one, and just turned it into a more of a thrusting sword. Like this, just skinnier and longer. And then by the end of the Empire, they were actually using spearmen for the most part because a lot of the troops had to be raised quite quickly because of the amount of barbarian invasions, as well as the fact that emperors were getting weary of their own troops. And a lot of the fall of Rome can be due to the fact that the Romans began infighting because of the fact that the empire was collapsing in on itself and so many groups were fighting for control. And if your army is willing to call you emperor, then you're going to lead them back to Rome to try to become the new emperor. So, yeah, this has been a short overview of Roman weapons and their shield. But again, I'm just going to show some basic cuts. Just to show you this, essentially how this would work. So, again. And then if they're going to come, they can come down. Those few slashes they needed, but Roman arms and armor, we have to remember that the Romans were essentially the most adaptable and some of the smartest people in the Mediterranean at the time when it came to military advancements. And they knew that getting a guy on the front lines for too long would tire him out. And Greek combat was forced by a lot of pushing. The Romans beat the Greeks by realizing how unmaneuverable Greek lines were, and they would essentially outflank them and do this exact same motion, but during that period they wouldn't have used a scutum that looks exactly like this. They'd use a more rounded oval scutum. So yeah, that's pretty much been it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Little 15-minute thing about Roman arms and armor. So yeah, I will see you in the next one.